Welcome back to another edition of the Fried Egg Golf Podcast and another episode of our series with Tom Doak, The Yoke with Doak. Big thanks to Tom for joining. This was recorded a couple weeks ago when I was up in the Traverse City area. In this episode, we're going to dive into listener questions as well as Tom's experience building Stone Eagle, one of his most difficult golf courses to build, which was kind of spurred from a listener conversation. This was a super fun conversation. If you haven't listened to part one of this recording, I thought we dove into some really interesting subjects, such as like analytics and short par fours. That was up last week. So check that out in the feed. It should be pretty easy to find. Big thanks to everybody for listening to this series and the pod. Thanks for all the support. And let's get to Tom. But first, let's talk about our new partner, Stripe. We're super excited to partner with Stripe. We have worked with Stripe for years. Stripe, we use Stripe for payment processing. They are they help us financially in terms of like just making it very seamless to run a business, an internet business. They are fantastic, fantastic company. They are a global payments leader. Stripe serves more than 2 million businesses of all sizes from, I think we're growing, but we're probably on the smaller side of things. From Fried Egg Golf to global giants like Alaska Airlines, Hertz, and PGA. And it powers 1% of the total global GDP. What an amazing stat to have. We process 1% of the total global GDP. That's pretty good. So Stripe serves millions of businesses of all sizes around the world. It learns from trillions of transactions and puts those revenue growing insights to work for businesses. Companies that use Stripe's optimized checkout suite saw a revenue uplift of 11.9% on average by intelligently serving up the right payment method to the right customer, converting to their local currency and adapting the perfect experience to any device they want to shop on. So Stripe has a lot of other things. They have optimized checkout suite. They have their billing software. It really is a full platform for your kind of payment needs. So if you're interested in learning more about Stripe, and this is what we use ourselves, go to stripe.com. So learn more at stripe.com. That's just like a striped tee shot down the fairway, STRIPE.com. Big thanks to Stripe for coming on and supporting the show. And let's get to Tom Doak. I wanted to get to a couple listener questions. I enjoyed this one. I thought I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this. This is from Adrian. After all these years creating world-class golf courses that truly span the globe, what keeps you motivated to keep producing such courses? Is it an exceptional piece of land, a great group of people looking to make something totally unique, or a combination of many factors? He says, thanks for taking the time.
Well, it's a combination of things. I mean, at this point in my career, my wife would rather I retired and was home all the time. I'm not going to be able to do that for a few years. It took me a long time to get to this position, and it's like, as long as people keep calling about cool stuff, I'm going to keep doing it for a while. I would say that my range is probably less. I mean, I'd say it's almost impossible that somebody's going to call me from Australia, New Zealand, or Asia and convince me that there's something I want to do over there that is really that much more spectacular than the stuff I've already gotten to do in Australia and New Zealand. Because it's such a long way to go, and it's so hard on your body. Somebody asked me today at the gym, like, so how many times did you go to New Zealand? And I was like, I know the answer to this because I had to I had to get a special visa to go this last time, and they ran all my immigration records. I've been to New Zealand 33 times.
Oh my God.
And like the one year we were building Cape Kidnappers and then Barnbougle and St. Andrews Beach right after it, I went back and forth 6 times every 2 months. I was on the plane going there and back. I do not recommend that to anyone.
You're just losing days of your life.
Yeah, just like, losing day, not just from Traverse City to there is a full 24 hours of travel, best case, if nothing goes wrong. So that and the jet lag and everything else, it's really hard to do. And I've loved every day I spent down there. Wouldn't change any of it, but I don't know that I want to do it anymore. And the other thing is they're so far away, you don't really get to enjoy them that much. I mean, I was lucky there for a while that, when we were still building Barnbougle and St. Andrews Beach or looking at doing the next thing at Terra Iti or even this last project at Tearai, I got to live by Terra Iti and I got to play it a bit. But that's really the only time I've spent any time at Terra Iti. Other than that, it's a couple days here and there stopping by. So, I'd rather do stuff closer to home. My wife would certainly rather I do stuff closer to home, and I probably will keep doing stuff, just bringing the circle in a little tighter. But, what keeps me wanting to do it is cool pieces of land that are hopefully a little different than something I've had before. It's like, oh yeah, we've talked before. I've got some concepts, like just got to find the right place to do this. Maybe I never will, but got an idea, waiting for somebody to come to me that has the same idea, which is how Sedge Valley got to be what it is. And then, working with my associates. So the planning part is pretty easy for me, and it doesn't take that, it's one long trip, and I've kind of got the routing figured out, maybe 2. To build it, I have to go back 4 or 5 times. And that would not be any fun for me anymore, except that I really love working with the shapers and my associates, and, letting them have the first crack at something or trying to explain to them what I want. But either way, just kind of working through it. It's like every new golf hall we build is just a little puzzle we got to figure out together. And it's a blast.
I imagine it's got to be pretty rewarding to see people that you've worked with. Like you take someone like Brian Schneider, who started working with you at a very young age, and now he's at the point where he's starting to build his own courses. And, seeing someone like Angela Moser, who went from just, digging ditches with you to where she's leading projects. I imagine that's some of the reward in what you're doing also, is it continues to, take these people and give them opportunities to progress in their careers.
Right. And that's one of the hardest parts of quitting, is that they're, they can all do stuff on their own, but they're not getting the opportunities to do it. Right. People still call me about it.
Yeah.
And if I could easily hand them a lot of the work, I would. And I'd just be, I'll just pick my spots and do one course a year. But it's still hard to do. Bill Course said the same thing to me years ago. When he and Ben were too busy, he would try to refer a job to me, but I wasn't well known enough. And it was like, if they weren't going to hire Bill and Ben, they wanted to hire Tom Fazio or Tom Weiskopf or some bigger name. And, it's the same with my associates. I mean, no offense to Rob Collins or Andrew Green. I think they do great work. I think I got a bunch of people working for me that could do just as good, but they don't get the chance because everybody thinks that's all mine. They still have to prove it. It's one thing to say you've got the talent to go do this, and you contribute a lot of cool ideas to that golf course. The other part of it is knowing when to say no And, I still edit stuff when I go to go and work with them. It's not like they just did it all and it was perfect and I didn't have any suggestions for them. So, I've tried to challenge them more, especially Brian and Eric the last 3 or 4 years. I'm like, okay, don't show it to me until you would sign off on it. And that's not as much fun for them. They would rather do something that's a little wild and have me tell them if it's okay or whether we need to tone it down instead of just building the safer version that they think, okay, I could get nobody's going to fire me for, or never hire me again if I do this.
It's something I think about a lot with golf architecture. What's the advantage? Like, is the advantage, if you're young in the industry, being able to say, hey, I've been a part of all these great projects. I've seen great golf courses being built or being on your own, in a situation where you can say, this is mine when you get that opportunity, which is like that's the hardest thing to do, is to get the opportunity. And when, like, the thing with working for you is you always have the security blanket of like, well, I have this to fall back. It almost like keeps you from being like having to go get your project and do, it's like, it's a really tricky situation. I don't know what the right answer is. And I think like it, if I had to do that job, I don't know which route I would pursue. It's like a very difficult.
One of the best compliments any of my people paid me years ago, Eric was talking about just this thing, and he's like, when we're building greens for, I think this is a Cape Kidnappers maybe, but somewhere way back in the day, he's like, when we're building stuff for you, it's like always coming to bat with the bases loaded. It's a great site. The routing's pretty good. It's like, it's just a spectacular location. It's like, should be able to do something with that. You don't even have to be a genius to do something that people are going to like. They do genius work sometimes, but it's like, the situation matters. At the same time, one of the reasons we got there is because I started on my own so young.
Yeah.
I mean, I was doing High Point the first time younger than a lot of the young people that start for me. They're 25, 26, getting their first taste of the business after like going to grad school for landscape architecture or something. And I was already out building a course on my own and making decisions. And, that's really how you get ready to do stuff on your own is, like I was explaining to Angela at Pinehurst, it's one thing to run a job. It's one thing to shape. It's another thing to run a job. And it's another thing to be able to make time for both at the same time. She's been watching Eric and Brian do that for a while and kind of underestimating like, how much the running the job part is going to take you away from the other stuff.
Yeah.
Because if it didn't, there would have been no chance for her to help them.
Well, I think that's that's what happens in almost every profession, right? As you move up,
you have to let go of the fun parts.
And you have to let go of some of the things. You have to. I think the hardest thing to do as you get busier, and I'm sure you've gone through this, is like what is essential for me to do versus what can other people do. And maybe other people could do even at a higher level than me, even though I enjoy doing that.
Yeah.
And,
as I've gotten older, it's like more and more of my time is on two things, routing and greens. There's a lot of people that can build really pretty bunkers now. And not to take anything away from that as being an important part of the job, but it's like, it was a lot easier to let go of that and let other people do cool looking bunkers and keep my time on the two things that I think I'm the best at. And they're to me, they're the two most critical things. You know, where the holes go kind of sets up everything else. It gives you a chance to build a cool green. It gives you places to build pretty bunkers. And then, you know, the greens, you just have to pay so much attention to detail because, you know, another 2 inches is the difference between this is cool and this is way too severe. So, you know, even if they're all working on those two and kind of helping out and coming up with their own ideas, it's like, we got to make sure these work. And, you know, that's where, if you're going to do kind of if you're going to do really interesting greens, that takes a lot of time. You got to make absolutely sure you know what you're doing.
Here's another question. I think it's kind of more of a bigger philosophical question. Is from Adam. I'm generally curious. I don't know if you know who Rick Rubin is. He's like this guy that's helped produce.
Yeah, Blake saw an interview with Rick Rubin a few years ago and said, "You need to watch this. He reminds me of you." So you know, I get the little Rick Rubin feed from Instagram now.
All right. So I'm generally curious about his creative process. Rick Rubin's The Creative Act has been a hit. That's his book. And he's known for not having a type of sound as a musician. Tom seems similar in not having a type, of course. I'm curious what he does to make sure he sticks with new ideas. Is it new? Is it just new concepts, or just reacting to the land every time, or something else?
Well, I mean, if you're comparing it to music, there are certain fundamentals of all music, no matter how different the genres and everything. I mean, there's still like only a few notes and only a few instruments that you're using to make them. So it's not completely different even in music from one thing to the next. There's certain kind of fundamentals like there are in golf. We just want to do something original. To do something, the whole point is to do something original and interesting instead of just repeating yourself. And, you know, the Rick Rubin quote I saw very recently that I was like, yes, exactly this. You know, you don't build stuff for the audience. You build stuff because you love building stuff and you're building it for yourselves to do something really cool. And if you do art that way, that's the stuff that'll be really successful. But if you're thinking about it commercially, you know, we've got to get 8-minute tee times around this thing. That's where it starts to fall apart. And, you know, unfortunately, sometimes part of my job now is like keeping the client, you know, I have to play defense on the client and listen to him talk about the commercial stuff so the rest of the crew doesn't. Mm-hmm. And maybe that leaks into it a little bit, but for a lot of clients, it would be a lot more than that. They do not understand that at the end of the day, the coolest stuff happens when we're just out there thinking about golf and not thinking about where this course is going to get rated or how much they're going to be able to charge to play it.
What ties well with that is what you said about, like, you know, what motivates you, you know, how you want to enjoy some of the places. If you're building it for you, what interests you, part of that is getting to see it every once in a while, getting to interact with it long term. And that's the hard thing I imagine about, like, that might, you know, while you're getting to build on spectacular sites in Australia and in New Zealand, and it's great being there, part of the joy is getting to play it long term, and that might be what makes it feel like work. I imagine I feel this way, is that I've worked very hard, and I work very hard. I work a lot of hours, but I don't feel like I'm working. And I imagine with a lot of what you do, it probably doesn't feel like work.
The travel is the work,
Yeah.
just getting back and forth and dealing with, and there was a question in that Golf Magazine thing I did a couple days ago about, what's the hardest part of the job? And I didn't get to, they didn't ask me that one. And I won't say what some of the other guys said, but the thing that they left out that I couldn't believe they left out is the uncertainty of it all. We sign things up. We don't know if they're going to happen or not. We don't know when they're going to happen. Do I sign up another project? Does that mean I'm going to have to do these two right at the same time if they both call me the same day and say yes? Trying to keep talented people busy and keep the workflow from getting too overwhelming on one end or not having anything to do on the other. That's the hardest part of, that's just running your own business.
Yeah.
And that's really hard. And, if you're trying to do new courses instead of renovation, the reason people gravitate toward renovation stuff is that goes on a more predictable schedule. When you're talking to these clubs, they're going to do it. They want to do it in the fall of this year or next year or the year after, but you kind of know when that's going to be. You've got a lot of advance notice. It's not like that for a new golf course. It's like, oh, we finally got the permits. Let's go. And you don't know when that's going to happen. So that's a very tough part of all of it. But yeah, I mean, for me, like just being around, it's not, honestly, I have more fun at this point in my life doing the routing, building the greens with my crew than actually playing after. That's partly because I'm not as good as I used to be. But, it's like I don't even care that much about playing those places a lot. Like when I was at Taraiti working on the other golf course, I didn't play it very many times. But just being there and being able to go walk around it in the evening and appreciate my own work the same way I like to go walk around the National Golf Links every time I get within 50 miles of it. That's really important to me. And that's why if it's in New Zealand, it's like I don't even get to do that.
I'm curious if you've thought about this as a concept. I think about this stuff a lot, and like the one thing I'd like to see you do at some point, like to me, and this might be the hardest thing, because if you look at like where these things go, they now pretty much only go to old golf courses. But have you ever thought about like how you would design a major championship golf course?
A little, but like, yeah, they don't go to new golf courses. And
The new golf
how many
courses
major championship golf courses were designed to host a major championship? Not very many. Like my courses have hosted the Women's Open and the Curtis Cup and the Mid-Ams and those kind of events. We were not thinking about those events in any way, shape, or form. I mean, it's really funny to me that Stonewall uses the second golf course there as, that's like the tournament course there now. That's the last thing I would have thought when we were building it. But I mean, when I worked for Pete Dye, everybody was so focused on how many tournament courses he built. And he kind of was too at one point, but by the same token, he would say, they'd be playing in a parking lot for $5 million. It's not
very, very true today. Some courses might be more interesting if it was a parking lot.
He just didn't have the ego of like, I'm building for players at the highest level. He was trying to. He was a great player. He liked challenging them, But he didn't think that because they, just because they played tournaments on his courses, that made him special somehow.
I think like one of the challenges, like when you think about if you like why a modern golf course might not work well, like why it's just like an inherent like flawed idea is like trying to design a major championship course in the modern era. Like, is all the needs of major championship golf are like they cut across like what you want from a golf course. And I'm going to say this, you didn't say this, this is me. But like one of the things I hate about Erin Hills is like, oh, if I went out the first tee time of the day, it would take me 4 hours to walk like by myself.
Yeah.
And but that would make a great major championship venue because like, you know what? You've got all this space to put venue like stuff like it's almost
you've got space for grandstands between the green and the next tee.
Exactly.
Instead of just walking off on the next tee.
So, yeah. But then like there's been this like, so we had these design courses with majors in mind with like Chambers and Erin Hills, which like and then the pushback's like, we don't want to win. The players don't want to win there, or they don't have enough history, and they push back to these old courses. And then the old courses present these unique logistical challenges. And it's almost like, it just like, it's funny how like if you had set out with the goal, it almost has to like, you have to throw out like we can design a golf course with major championship golf in mind from like the golf sense, but not from like the spatial sense, like and the logistical sense. Like that can't be invading the art of building a great golf course almost.
Right. And if you do a project where the PGA Tour is involved, they have a whole division of guys that come out and tell you to put things further apart, and we've got to jam these big grandstands in here, so let's move that tee over there and make it not as easily connected. It's just, I mean, not to pick on them, that's what their mission is, but that's why TPC courses are not fun to play when there's not a tournament there. It's like there's something missing here. Yeah, you're missing all the grandstands and infrastructure that are the only reason that tee is over there instead of right here.
It's almost as if they should just keep the stands up all the time and put pavement under them, and the golf courses would make more sense.
Well, that's, Mr. Dye's version of stadium golf was to do as much of that as he could with big mounds. And, the TPC at Sawgrass, when I first saw it, it had like bleachers made of railroad ties.
So cool.
Didn't last long.
It was so cool though. Like you see those old pictures with the terraced like green seating. It's like, it's so neat. It's almost more like when you go to like the big house, the Michigan's football stadium, just the bleachers versus the individual seats of a traditional grandstand. It's it's almost like so many things in life. If you want to do something, you need to do like the opposite of the logical way to do it, right? Like if you want to build, you can't think of the obvious things that you would need to host a major championship, which are the logistics.
Yeah, I mean, you were asking earlier about what kind of projects I want to take on. My one pretty consistent thing is, the main focus of this project should be golf and people playing golf, and not the housing, not the tournament, not those things are distractions away from the golf. And you start thinking about them too much, the golf is not going to be nearly as good. So, it's not that I won't build a golf course that has housing, but if the client cares a lot more about the housing than the golf, that's not going to be good. I mean, there's just no, he's going to make several decisions that take away from the golf, and I'm going to get frustrated and I'll let somebody else deal with that.
I mean, it's kind of true about like anything though. Like if they're really into any specific feature outside of the golf, the club's going to become about that, or the course is going to become about that.
Right. You have to remember what your priorities are.
Yeah.
And if your priorities aren't the same, that's going to be hard.
Yeah. All right, Tom, let's talk about a couple golf courses that we haven't discussed much on this podcast over the it's like probably 5-6 years now. I got a question about this, and it relates to both a current project of yours and a past project. It was from Jake Archambault. Archambault. He asked, Tom, he'd like to hear you discuss working at Punta Brava. And is it the most difficult site you've worked on since Stone Eagle?
It's the most difficult site I've worked on, including Stone Eagle, by a lot. I mean, it's they're both very rocky, but Stone Eagle, the rocks there tended to break down under, if you had like if you were getting into rock just a little bit and you ran a big bulldozer over it a bunch of times, it kind of crushed it down. And then we did, sand capping was trying to get a bunch of sand up that hill at Stone Eagle to sand cap it. As hot as it is there, just didn't make any sense to us. So all of Stone Eagle after the rough shaping was topsoiled with material crushed from the site. Like they build courses in Hawaii. In Hawaii, they crush the lava to make a topsoil. At Stone Eagle, we crushed the rocks that in places we cut, ran it through a crusher, had a pile of material about 40 feet high in the middle of 17th fairway, because that was kind of central for like half the job, and then just started whittling away at it throughout the project. Stone Eagle took a lot of cuts and fills to build, and a lot of creativity to how to fit something in. And some of those fairways are basically a ravine that's been filled up to make a fairway, so we could keep the rock formations on the sides. It was very much just a washboard of drainage coming off the hill and going down certain valleys to get out and get more and more eroded over time. And in between those valleys, it would go up into some rockier stuff that was higher ground to start and didn't get eroded. And, to try to keep those, to try to build a hole across them all would have been really hard. So we have a lot more up and downhill holes because we're trying to keep the things at the sides. But that, compared to Stone Eagle, where the rock is really not crushable, it's granite, and it's the only reason that point is still there and hasn't been blown away by the Pacific Ocean in the last 50,000 years is because that rock is hard as a rock. So there's no, it's like rock hammer to break it up and get it out of there, and it doesn't really crush down very easily. So we will sand cap that. We can use the big rock, the chunky rocks as fill in places, but at the end of the day, we've got to bring in sand to sand cap the whole thing. And then on top of that, there's been a ton of archaeology work done. It took them 9 months to do the archaeology work on the back nine in front of us. And, now we're kind of clear of that. We've got most of the back nine built, and we have to turn around and go do the same thing all over again for the front nine. So we can only build a couple holes at a time as they're like clear, signing off on areas. So it's like, this is okay now. We've checked it out. And I really don't understand the archaeology of it too much. My brother's an archaeologist. I'm not making fun of archaeology as a thing.
Tom Doak hates archaeology.
No.
I see the headline.
No. And, in Britain, every time I've worked in Britain, they found some really cool stuff in the course of going over what we do. And at the Renaissance Club, they were looking for the remains of an old castle, but they didn't. Luckily, we didn't dig that up. At Castle Stuart, they had them like trench every few meters. We had to trench 1/7 of the whole site, put a bucket down, see if there's anything there, like all the way from here, 1,000 yards that way. Skip over 7 yards, do it again. Amazing. But they found like a Roman chariot wheel. They found some crazy stuff there. And they're still, the client's still paying for them to write the report on that one. But I don't understand, what I don't understand at Punta Brava is, what are we finding? I just told you how rocky it is. There's nothing very far down. Yeah. Why does it take so long? You can't dig. There's nothing hiding.
Maybe they're trying to dig.
I have to stay away from it when I'm there. I don't want to. We don't want to upset them. But it's been a very Stone Eagle we built in just over a year of construction. I think Punta Brava will be 2.5 years before we're done with it. To be honest, the first 6 months we were there, we shouldn't have been there yet. But we've just been going very slow and very patiently behind, and have about 8 holes built now, and they're pretty spectacular.
So Stone Eagle's in Palm Desert area, very popular golf place. And would you describe it on the side of a mountain?
It's kind of in a bowl up against the mountains, but it's, people that know Palm Springs that know that area well, I used to say in Palm Desert, there's a church that put a lighted cross up on the hill, and you see it at night, when the sun goes down, not like floodlights, like 500 lights on this thing. And it's very noticeable. And I would ask people if they knew that, and they would say yes. And I would say, yeah, the golf course is just up behind that in the bowl on the other side. And they're like, what? How could there be, because it's several hundred feet above town. And the first time Ted Lennon, the developer, took me up there, he hadn't really told me too much about what I was going to see. And then we got up to about where the 17th tee is now, when you can finally see you get to the top of going up and you look over into the bowl, and it's like, never seen anything like that before. And the very first question he asked me was like, what do you think? And I was like, this could be spectacular if we can figure out how to make it work. But it was clearly going to be a really hard golf course to build.
I think like most people, when the topic of conversation comes to you and Bill and Ben, are like, well, they got all the spectacular sites that they've worked on, you don't get to see these architects work on these sites. They get the pick of the litter. I imagine that one would be one that you might point to as like, this was something that wasn't just sitting there that I'd had to just put grass on. This was something that I really had to work on. Walk us through just figuring out, how routing there, where you're doing a lot of creating, how did that differ from routing at a extraordinarily natural site, say like a Tara Iti?
Oh, well, you kind of got that backwards. Tara Iti had a few features, but we pretty much had to rebuild that from wall to wall because they planted this pine plantation on it. By the time you got all the trees out of there, other than a few 6-8 foot high ridges and one general slope up, there was nothing left. We had to rebuild all the little contours. We had to revegetate the entire thing. Stone Eagle was a very severe site, but there were a lot of natural features to work with. And we had to figure out, what can we keep of this? And, how do we fix the rest to, build around those features? Mm-hmm. It's one of the few projects that I've had that I saw routing from another architect before I started trying to do it. Discovery had looked at that, and it had Tom Fazio do a routing for it. So I kind of saw Tom Fazio's routing, and he had holes kind of going up and down the hill a little bit like where number 1 and number 4 are, but then he had a bunch of holes kind of going across the slope. And from the bottom of the golf course to the top is 300 feet of elevation change. And it's been a while since we did it, but I would say it's very washboardy as the water comes off the mountains, but if it's just a general grade going up there, that's probably 6 or 7% or something like that. So if you thought about it, if it wasn't a desert, it'd be similar to Pasatiempo. Mm-hmm. Really uphill and really downhill holes, deep ravines in between them. It's that kind of site, but in a desert landscape. And it really helped that I had consulted on Pasatiempo, and I knew that the first time I measured out a couple of these holes going up or downhill, they were like 80 or 90 feet uphill.
Like 11, right? At Pasatiempo.
Yeah. But that's the second hole at Stone Eagle. That's the 10th hole. That's the 17th hole. They're all that much uphill. And I might have said that's too much, because a lot of the great courses, the uphill holes are like 30 and 40 feet uphill. It's like 20 feet per shot is sort of in the frame of, oh, that's not so bad. And once you get more than that, it's like, boy, that seems like a lot. So, we're talking double that. But I knew Pasatiempo had holes that went uphill that much. I knew Augusta National had holes that go uphill about that much. I thought, okay, it's going to be like those. It's going to be a lot harder to walk. Not that the client really thought a lot of people were going to walk it anyway. They were thinking they were selling to old guys, everybody be in a golf cart. But, just knowing that this is not out of scale with Augusta and Pasatiempo, it's like, okay, we can do this. And the more the holes go up and downhill, the more of the ridgy parts of the washboard as you went across the side of the hill, you could keep. And, the rock formations there are pretty spectacular, and we used them as much as we could. There's one on the, there's a couple behind the first green. And to the right of the first green, there's one that's like a gun sight for the tee shot from the lower tee on number 2. There's one on number 4 that comes in from the right, and if you drive it right, you have to play over it to the green. There's another one behind the 9th green. There's in the 10th, you're playing up into it looks like some dinosaur movie up there where there's just a narrow, steep valley, and it looks like some boulders have just rolled out of there, but been rolled out of there by big animals. So it's a crazy setting for golf. And, honestly, one of the most spectacular pieces of land I've ever had. I mean, it's a beautiful place. It was a really hard place to build a golf course because of that elevation change. I don't think the golf course, it's not a highly ranked golf course. It's starting to get more notice, but the funny thing about it is it's off brand for me.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to walk because it's so steep. It's not hard. I've walked all 18 holes. I can still walk all 18 holes there, and usually they won't let you carry your bag, but I could do it. Because it's so rocky and we left so much of that, it's hard to not hit the ball in the desert once or twice and maybe lose a ball. And, I try to build golf courses where you still got the same 2 balls you started with. So that's a little different than what I normally do. And, it's always been a really exclusive private place, and it's gotten more so with the new ownership. So, they don't have a lot of the panelist people out and cater to them that much. They don't really care. And of course, you don't drive by it. It's way up there in its own little bowl. And, if you go hiking up those mountains, there's a couple of trails you can see it from. But, the average person is never going to know it's there if they're not invited.
With seeing Tom Fazio's routing, I guess, how did that, you said it's one of the few times you saw another architect's routing before you did yours. How did that inform, or did you think about it while you were doing your routing?
Yeah, it's really hard. The reason I don't like to see them is because you see some things on it, you're like, that looks like a good idea, and that looks like a good idea. And if say the 3 pieces you latch onto, one's over here, and that hole plays kind of south to north, so it blocks playing east to west through that whole part of the golf course. And then another one is over here. You're going to be trying to think about how you get from there to there. How does that link up? And there's probably not a million different ways you can do that. So it just directs your thought in certain ways, and it's really hard to get away from it.
It's like a ton, rather than looking at the whole thing with a fresh mind, it gives you almost tunnel vision where you fixate, right?
I mean, the advantage is, okay, there's enough space there for 18 holes, because that was the first thing. It wasn't a huge piece of land, and it was steep, so you knew you weren't going to be really efficient with that. And I did wonder, can we fit 18 holes on this? And to do it originally, I thought we were going to have a couple holes. The 12th hole is a little par 3 downhill, very severe. Then the 13th is a big par 5 way down the hill. But there is another 20 acres to the right of that I thought we were going to have a hole going, perpendicular to 13, kind of out and back to make that work. And that was not the, there had been some home development around that part of the parcel originally, and it was not the greatest looking stuff. So we didn't want, it's like, we've got a small piece of land and we don't really want to go over there. So can we fit 18 holes on this part of the site without even going over there? That was hard. And then on top of that, the idea from the beginning is, okay, you're going to park down the base of the hill. I said that the golf course is 300 feet from the bottom to the top, but where you park your car and get your golf cart is another 300 or 400 feet below that.
Oh my God.
So you got to get in a car and ride all the way up the mountain. No other way to do it. Starting point was pretty much fixed. There was, if you're going to do something like that, you're going to start from the first place you get to there. And one of the very first hole I found was a really cool par 3 hole, kind of a long par 3 hole, with just some beautiful rock outcroppings around it. And I'm like, well, hell, that's either going to have to be the first hole or the 18th hole. And I don't think this client's going to really like the sound of either of those, especially since it's kind of a fairly long par 3 and kind of intimidating. And, I really tried to convince them to make it actually, my favorite was making it the first hole instead of the 18th. But we went back and forth, and they just couldn't get comfortable with either. So it's there as the 19th hole. We had to shorten it a little bit from where the tee would have been almost right by the 18th green, but with the little, what they call the Airy, the little clubhouse that they built up there, it'd be too dangerous to play it from the length that I was thinking a little bit. So it's only like a 150-yard hole. But that was one of the first holes I found. We wound up having to cram 19 holes into that site instead of 18 because that 200 yards really, it didn't tie into being part of a longer hole. So it took a while to do a routing that everybody was happy with. There were a couple, 3 different versions, and other than, until the very last one, we had some holes in a space that we didn't want to use. And then I finally figured out it was actually the 6th hole, making the 6th hole go all the way up to the kind of top of the thing, and then having a long transition from there to the 7th, the downhill par 3, is what made it work. That got me an extra hole to get 19 holes into the site.
So it was almost like you had to make it more of an extreme climb.
Yes.
And then, in terms of like you're probably one of your kind of, I wouldn't call them rules, but thoughts of like close green to close tee, long transition made the routing work.
Yeah, we wound up using 5 or 10 acres that way that it was just too steep to use. And that 6th hole, like I've only built 2 golf courses that we used any dynamite to build. There was one of the green sites on the old course at Stonewall, the 15th green, was a rocky ridge, and we had to dynamite just a little bit there to get it because we didn't have it. You probably could have done that with a rock hammer like we're using at Stone Eagle now, but we didn't have that for building the rest of the golf course because there wasn't any rock. So that one little thing was like, okay, we'll just get dynamite and do it. But at Stone Eagle, we had a couple places that we were making 15-foot cuts in rock. And of course, dynamite to break that up at the beginning is a lot easier to do. But if you dynamite anything, at least in California laws, I don't know if it's the same everywhere, but if you're going to dynamite something, you might damage something around it, like damage the foundation of a house, so you can't be too close to houses. And there are a couple of houses on that side, like up by that lighted cross. There were a couple houses over there, so we're trying to build this hole out of the side of the mountain without dynamiting it. And like we had the biggest D10 bulldozer you could possibly have trying to rip and cut the rock and push it into that fairway. And by the end of it, it was like we had a D10 hanging by the rippers off the side of this thing, and it wouldn't break the rock. And it's like, all right, we're going to have to dynamite that. So that was a lot of work. That hole is spectacular. That little short par 4 drive and pitch hole, you're just playing. It just feels like you're playing up into the sky, but it's a really spectacular hole.
When you have such a severe site, I imagine like one of the benefits of it is like you can build pure, like such spectacular holes, like holes that most golfers aren't used to seeing, but the struggle is to cohesively tie them together in a way.
Well, as I've explained before, the hardest part of working when you're moving dirt is to like find good places to stop where you can kind of tie it in and it doesn't look like you did stuff. Now, I mean, that kind of sounds ridiculous when you're like creating a golf course in the desert. It's like wherever the grass stops is, nothing in the grass is natural at all because everything outside the thing is rocky desert. So obviously the golf course is not natural, but you still want the shapes to feel natural instead of like you just change the world inside the paint lines. And there were some places there that was very hard to pull off. And, I think we we got them all. It really fits in there well. But the funny thing is, you think about, like, when you think about something that's spectacular visually, you're talking about features of golf holes. To me, and it wasn't until we were all done with it, one of the first times I was out there, it was with a guy that was doing a video thing for them. And they did a member event where Al Geiberger was their honorary pro when they started, and
Mr. 59.
Mr. 59, and he was out there with his sons. Brent was on tour. The other son was like caddying on tour, and he had his youngest son was like 17 and playing high school golf, and the Ted Lennon was they were all going to hit tee shots and play the first hole in the dirt in front of a bunch of members. And Ted Lennon, our client, is going down with me and the 17-year-old kid to go down to the first tee to hit balls. And Ted's like, "Can you hit it far?" And the kid's like, "Yeah, I guess." And Ted's like, "Can you hit it 300 yards?" And the kid goes, "Well, gee, I hope so." But his brothers are all tour players. So that was like, of course I can. But when they hit their tee shots, this is the first time I'd seen anybody hit a tee ball there. And from the moment the entire time the ball was in the air, and the entire time the ball's in the air on the first, every shot you hit on the first two holes, you're seeing it fly up against the mountain background, this deep red mountain background. It looks like you're playing golf on Mars. Nothing else to compare it to that I've ever seen.
I think that's one of the coolest things in golf is when your ball flies against a backdrop. And like a tee shot, you're talking about this, I immediately thought of some mountain tee shots, whether it's at Meadow Club or Soul Park in California, where you're teeing off against a mountain. But then I thought, like, when I was younger and I worked in the city of Chicago, I used to play a lot of early morning rounds at Sidney Maravitz or Waveland, which is a 9-hole course right on the lake.
Yep.
And one of the most spectacular tee shots was you're hitting and it's up against the 25-story apartment high rises. Just watching the ball against it's just one of the coolest things. And I think you've talked about like how in old architecture or classic architecture, they didn't really think about backdrops, but that is such a big part of what you guys do now, is like getting stuff sometimes lined up to have that spectacular feature in the distance.
Right. But I swear, I never thought about that as a feature of the golf course until we had most of it built. And I was out there with this video guy, and he's like, "Oh my God, I've never taken a picture that looked like that before."
It's an amazing thing. With holes playing up and down a lot, like similar direction, I imagine, how do you go about creating variety when you don't have as much freedom to play across, as you said,
Well, I mean, there were 5 holes that played sharply uphill, and we thought a lot about, okay, how do we make these green sites feel different? And, a lot of the stuff that was beside the fairways was kind of there, like the first 2 holes, the first you're playing kind of downhill or level off the tee and then up. And then number 2 goes up. You come back down at 4, 5 goes up. You come back down at 9, 10 goes up. Come back down 13, 14 goes back up. Come back down, 17 goes back up. 5 holes. All 2 is kind of a little bit shorter par 4, but a lot of them are the same length. They're long par 4 or par 5. And the setting on number 10 I described with that you're right to the crotch of where the two mountains come together and there's this crazy valley up beyond it that's just super dramatic. And it's like, okay, that looks so much different than everything else that doesn't count. That's like its own special place. And 14 actually kind of plays toward that same feature, but further away. But, 14, you drive up short of a ravine, kind of like 11 and Pasatiempo, not so much side to side, but you drive up short of a ravine and then you have to hit up and the ravine on your right. Number 5, you've got a ravine on the left coming all the way down that I think they put a bit of water feature into because the irrigation pond is by the tee there. And then 17 was the hardest one because we couldn't really, it was broader and there was a kind of rock feature in the middle that we built bunkers into, and you play kind of either side of the bunkers. But the big one was the hardest one for me to figure out was number 2. Now I said all these shots, the approach shots are so much uphill that there's no way you see the putting surface from the fairway. The green is way above you. Any part of the green that you could see would be pitched back at you like 6-7%. The ball would just roll back off it. So you can't really, most people would think false front, but it's just too high. You can't really have that. So we really struggled figuring out, you can have the green sitting up and you see the flag and you see bunkers all around it. But that's going to get really old, especially on a 40-foot uphill long approach shot. It's like you're just never going to get there. And another course that has this, and they didn't do a good job on it, is Mauna Kea. Okay. I played there with my wife, and that's what some of those holes felt like. You're just like, if it feels like you're grinding up to the, I can't think of the name of it. The Iwo Jima thing where you get ready to plant the flag at the top of the mountain. Yeah. And there's just no way up there. It's just so severe. So, we wanted fairway getting to these green sites, and it was a trick to get to get a ball that landed short to at least have a chance to bounce on the green, or, you didn't have to hit a pitch over a bunch of bunkers to get to the green. So there's only one of the 5 holes that really has bunkers around the front at all. The best one, I really had a 3-man crew for that project. Eric Iverson ran the job and lived on it. Kyle France lived with Eric in the house for a year. And a guy named Jeremy Miller, who worked for the contractor, was the same guy who had worked on Lost Dunes years before. So it was basically the 3 of them doing most of the creative stuff. And, my other guys helped out a little bit, but not too much because we were busy with other projects at the same time. We were doing Sabonic at the same time, and we were doing Ballyneal at the same time. So we were spread out pretty good. But the most creative thing that those guys did that I didn't see on the second hole, instead of trying to make the green more visible, they actually built up short and to the right of it and put big bunkers into that and made it like a half Alps hole. There is a little bit of fairway that goes around the left, and you can actually see like back into there and that just off the left side of the green. But that feature short of it was like, that was another way to combat the severe uphill, was just make it blind and actually play over something instead of just to the top.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like a lot of severe sites, you get that feeling of like, I just am hitting these uphill semi-blind approaches all day. Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that, is a really logical thing that you did, just based off of when you list out the holes that the uphill holes are on, there's good spacing between them, so that it's not like you're playing on a 3 or 4 hole stretch where they all go up.
No, it's very much, in plan view, that's that's much more of like a back and forth routing than most anything I've done. You know, it's a 1 and 2 go the same direction kind of up the hill. That's the most holes you play in a row going up the hill. So the one other hole that I'd like to talk about there, it kind of was on Tom Fazia's plan, but I don't think he would have done quite what we did. When you get to the very top, the 8th hole is the one hole that plays kind of along the side of the mountain at the top. And, you know, I was worried about that because, you know, just to get the left side of the fairway on the 8th hole kind of up half level with the right side of the fairway, it's, you know, the mountain's on the right and you're playing kind of around from left to right. So just to get that left side up half level was like 12 feet of fill. And you know, you can, it's not too hard to make that look good from number 8 because you don't see what's on the face of all the fill that you put going down off the left. You're trying to get that far enough out, nobody hits it off the left side. But you got to you're looking at that from below. You're looking at it from the 3rd hole, and you're looking at it from the 5th hole when you go up that valley. And it was like, you know, we didn't try to, we thought if we tried to re-veg it like desert, it would take years for it to look natural. And in the end of the day, we just decided, hey, we can just grass that. And, you know, part of where 8 ties into number 3, it's a big shoulder coming down into the 3rd green. So, you know, we used it to make some things that look really dramatic and have a big slope coming down into another hole that you normally wouldn't do on another. You know, if that had been there like that, we wouldn't have grassed it all the way down. But since we had to fix that area anyway, it made sense to do it, and it looks different and it looks good. But then the cool thing about that 8th hole, you know, there was a pretty severe drainage going down and kind of through where that fairway was, and like a wash, but a really deep one. And there was no way, you know, we couldn't interrupt the fairway there. You wouldn't have been able to see that spot. It would have been too far off the tee. A lot of people wouldn't have made the carry. So it's like, okay, we're just going to bridge across this thing completely. But we left it on the right side, just as steep as the wash was. We just left that as the right. It made this little corkscrew thing. We just left that and turned that into a fairway bunker. So it's a short par 5, but this fairway bunker to the right of the fairway is like 15 or 20 feet deep. And if you hit in it, it's going to cost you at least 1 shot, maybe 2 or 3. And, you know, it's kind of you want to go for it in 2 par 5, but you got to take that on in order to go for it in 2. And it will mess up your day if you're in it. And it's like, it's one of the most severe hazards on any course I've built. And I just love that we figured out how to keep it.
That's awesome. I imagine if it was, you talked about like the 8% grade, is that prohibits the feasibility of playing across it very much, right? That was the prohibiting factor.
It's partly that, but it's partly that, you know, from tee to green on a 400-yard hole, there would have been 4 or 5 little valleys where stuff washed across. And, you know, if you were in one of the lows, you couldn't see over the high to see where the next one was. So it just, you know, you would have just had to try to bulldoze along the side of the hill. And then what do you do with all the drainage?
Yeah.
Once, because you're kind of trapping it in places. We actually did let a little more drainage go across the turf than I thought we could. We had a really good engineer there, and he's like, no, you'll be able to get away with this, except, you know, it may get washed away once every 20 years or something. You'll have a section of fairway you have to fix, but there's not as much as you think.
All right, Tom, thank you. Next time we'll get to more listener questions. I got so many, and we only scratched the surface. But thanks for making the time on this. It was rather late notice. I was coming to town, so this was great to get this in here. Last days of the season here in Traverse City, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
All right, thanks for coming, making it a home game for me.
All right, thank you for listening to another edition of the Fried Egg Golf Podcast, and another episode of The Yoke with Doak. Big thanks to PJ Clark for editing and producing this episode. Big thanks to Matt Ruches for filming it. You know, these last few Yoke with Dokes are available on our YouTube page if you haven't checked it out. That's maybe a good call to action. If you don't subscribe to our YouTube page, do that. We have a video with Tom that's going up this week about Sedge Valley. I think it's a pretty neat video. So worthwhile going over to the old YouTube page, Fried Egg Golf on YouTube, subscribing. You'll get all of our videos. All of our pods are going up there. And an awesome video on Sedge Valley is going up Thursday. So check that out. And we'll be back later this week. We actually, big architecture week. Garrett and I do a mailbag pod for Thursday. So thank you guys for listening, and we'll be back Thursday with more architecture talk on the Fried Egg Golf Podcast.